Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jessica had always been one of those restless women. From a very young age, she carried within herself an ambition that seemed greater than anything the world could offer. She loved to dance, and it was never just a hobby for her. She turned it into a profession, teaching, performing, choreographing, but inside her, there was a persistent voice saying that it still wasn't enough, that she deserved more, that she needed more. During the first years of her relationship with Brian, it almost seemed like that feeling of dissatisfaction would remain hidden, dormant. They got married after 3 years together in a simple ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. Brian was affectionate, fun, and always present. But over time, Jessica began to feel suffocated by the ordinary life they were leading. He was the type who believed that working, paying the bills, watching a movie at the end of the day, and being close to the person you love was enough to be happy. But for her, it felt increasingly tight, uncomfortable, too small for all her dreams. The conversations that used to be about plans, trips, and projects turned into arguments. Jessica talked about opening her own studio, launching an app, traveling, growing. And Brian, with his always calm demeanor, tried to convince her that they could do it gradually, at the right time, without pressure, without debt, without unnecessary risks. This irritated her. She wanted it yesterday, not 5 years from now. No matter how loving Brian was, little by little, that lack of ambition started to generate a kind of frustration that was hard to control. She spent hours imagining what life would be like if she had someone with more vision, more courage, more desire to grow by her side. Ironically, this comparison often came to her when she thought about her cousin Claire. Claire always had a life that seemed taken from a movie. The daughter of successful entrepreneurs, she had access to everything from a young age. Good schools, trips, cars, expensive clothes, opportunities. But it wasn't just that. Claire also had Austin by her side, a man who embodied everything Jessica considered essential for a successful life. Intelligent, confident, successful, and above all, someone who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. When Claire invited her to spend that weekend at the beach house, Jessica didn't think twice. She accepted right away. Brian stayed home, claiming he had too much work and preferred to rest. Deep down, Jessica even thought it was better that way. She needed that time just for herself, away from the routine, the demands, the problems, and especially away from the suffocating feeling of being stuck in the same place. When she arrived, Jessica realized that the environment reflected exactly the life she desired so much. Luxury cars in the garage, well-dressed people, conversations about business, investments, trips. All of it seemed to reinforce even more how out of place she felt in her own life. And it was in this setting that her eyes met Austin's in a different way. Until that moment, he was just the cousin's fiancé. Always polite, friendly, but until then, nothing more than that. But that day, something changed. Jessica noticed a lingering look, a different smile, a kindness that seemed to go beyond what would be normal between future relatives. They started talking about random topics, music, travel, work. And as they talked, Jessica noticed how different Austin was from Brian. Every sentence he spoke carried a confidence she had never seen in her boyfriend. He talked about business like it was second nature. He had projects, goals, bold plans, and above all, showed that he didn't accept living an average life. That stirred something inside her that she couldn't even explain. Minutes passed, and without realizing it, the two were completely absorbed in the conversation, as if the world around them had disappeared. Jessica found herself laughing at jokes that weren't even that funny, fixing her hair, crossing her legs, looking at him in a way she didn't even try to hide. And Austin, despite being engaged, seemed to respond to every signal she gave off. At the end of the afternoon, when everyone was gathered on the porch, Jessica noticed Austin looking at her from afar. It gave her butterflies, a strange mix of guilt, adrenaline, and desire. It was wrong, she knew it. But for the first time in a long while, she felt alive. She felt seen, desired, valued. Throughout the night, amid casual conversations, the looks repeated. And at one point when Claire stepped away to take a call, Austin approached and made a comment that seemed loaded with double meanings. He said something like, "You know, it's hard to understand how some people settle for so little in life," looking directly into her eyes. Jessica smiled, fully understanding what he meant. And from that moment on, what had started as an exchange of glances turned into a dangerous game. They began finding any excuse to be near each other. A trip to the kitchen, a walk to the beach, a more private conversation away from the other guests. Each moment was a risk, but also a spark that ignited something she no longer had the strength to control. When she returned home, Jessica lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Brian, next to her, slept peacefully, oblivious to everything. And as she looked at him, one question kept echoing in her mind without stopping: is this what I want for the rest of my life? And without realizing it, at that exact moment, Jessica had already crossed an invisible line. A line that, once crossed, has no return. Jessica came back from that weekend different. As much as she tried, she couldn't ignore what she was feeling. The conversations with Austin, the looks, that connection beyond any logic. It was as if, suddenly, she had seen how far her life was from everything she had dreamed of. And the more she thought about it, the more distant she became from Brian, who, in turn, continued with the same quiet routine, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. As the days went by, what started with looks and subtle messages quickly turned into something much more intense. Conversations that initially seemed harmless soon took a different turn. Jokes gained double meanings, compliments became more direct, and before they realized it, they were completely involved. Jessica couldn't think of anything else. Every time her phone vibrated, her heart raced, hoping it was Austin. And when he sent that direct message, "I want to see you today. Just the two of us. No excuses." She felt a mix of fear, anxiety, and desire. He didn't suggest coffee or dinner. He sent the location of a motel directly, as if it had been agreed upon for a long time, and she, simply accepted. When she arrived, Austin was already there. She parked, took a deep breath, looked at her reflection in the car mirror, and realized how nervous she was, but at the same time, filled with an excitement she never imagined feeling. She went up to the room, and as soon as she opened the door, he pulled her by the waist, as if all that pent-up desire from the last few weeks was overflowing in that instant. Without exchanging words, without hesitation. It was as if they wanted to make up for lost time, as if the entire world had stopped just for them. In that room, all that existed was desire, the forbidden, the risk, and the urge to live something that, deep down, both knew could destroy everything. And even knowing that, they didn't stop. While all this was happening, Brian continued his life normally, completely unaware of any signs of what was going on. Jessica came home as if nothing had happened, smiled, asked about his day, made plans, pretended interest in their conversations. And unbelievably, Brian suspected absolutely nothing. He continued believing he had a dedicated, faithful, committed wife, while in reality, she was living a parallel life, full of secrets, lies, and choices he could never imagine. And at the same time, she started seeing Brian with different eyes. Everything about him seemed duller, slower, less interesting. Their conversations were always about the same things: bills, groceries, work issues, the usual everyday life. Jessica, on the other hand, was obsessed with an idea: creating a dance app. A project that, if successful, could finally pull her out of that life. And obviously, turn everything she knew how to do into money, a lot of money. She even talked to Brian about it. He, as always, wanted to help and offered the little he had saved, but it wasn't even close to the amount needed. That's when she made a decision that, up to that point, seemed logical in her mind. She approached Austin. She flirted, complimented him, made sure to say how much she admired intelligent, daring, and visionary men. And in a way that seemed almost natural, she steered the conversation toward her project. She told him her plans, how revolutionary it could be, talked about the difficulties, the costs, and how hard it was to make it all happen. Austin listened, asked some questions, but deep down, she knew he had already made his decision before hearing all the details. And she was right. The next day, he made a generous transfer to her account, without hesitation, without contracts, without bureaucracy. He just looked into her eyes and said, "Consider this an investment, in you." Jessica was ecstatic. That feeling of being supported, valued, and most importantly, closer to the life she had always dreamed of. She felt that, finally, things were starting to make sense. But as the weeks went by, something changed. Austin, who had always been available, started to become more distant. Messages took longer to be answered. Meetings, which used to happen frequently, began to be cancelled. Always with some excuse: meetings, trips, commitments. And when they did meet, he was colder, more distant, as if he wanted to keep her close but without committing too much. Jessica noticed that he avoided any conversation involving the future. Every time she hinted at being together, at having something more serious, Austin would change the subject, divert the conversation, or crack a joke, as if it were not even a real possibility. Her anxiety started to spiral out of control. She spent hours looking at her phone, waiting for a message, a call, any sign that he was still as involved as before. And with each silence, she felt disposable, as if, after getting what he wanted, he was simply returning to his perfect life with Claire. When she managed to get a meeting with Austin, she realized that this encounter might be the last. Jessica, driven by desperation, grabbed Austin's arm, looked firmly into his eyes, and blurted out, almost without thinking, "I'm pregnant." She knew it was a lie, but at that moment, it seemed the only way not to lose him. As soon as he heard that, Austin widened his eyes and asked directly, "And are you sure this child is mine? What if it's Brian's?" Without hesitating, Jessica replied firmly, "Don't worry, Brian and I haven't been intimate for weeks." She said it dryly, directly, hoping it would change everything, that it would make Austin commit, give her a fixed place in his life. And for a few moments, it seemed like it would work. He was in shock, asked if she was sure, wanted to understand how it had happened. Jessica, trembling inside, held firmly to the lie. She made up a story, said she'd found out a few days ago, that she was trying to figure out how to handle it, and that she only told him because she thought he deserved to know. And from that point on, the game that had once seemed fun turned into a heavy web, difficult to sustain, made of lies, insecurities, and choices that were starting to completely spin out of control. In the following days, Austin acted differently. He sent messages, asked how she was feeling, if she needed anything, but it was clear it wasn't exactly excitement. It was more responsibility, maybe fear, maybe pressure. Jessica felt that he was there, but only halfway. To keep this story alive, she had to try harder. She invented nausea, dizziness, said she was sleeping poorly, that she was sensitive. She created situations to justify any mood swings, any unavailability, any postponed meetings. In some conversations, Austin suggested they go together for a checkup, to better understand the situation, run tests, see where things stood. But Jessica avoided that topic all the time. She made up excuses that the doctor had cancelled, that she wasn't feeling well, that she preferred to wait a bit longer to be sure everything was fine. It was one excuse after another. And as this charade advanced, the weight of the lie grew heavier and heavier. Meanwhile, Claire began to suspect. Austin was acting strange. He forgot appointments, was distracted during conversations, spent a lot of time on his phone. And unlike before, he was more distant, less affectionate, more absent. Claire wasn't stupid. She started observing behaviors, paying attention to schedules, absences, whispers on the phone. Until one day, when Austin left his laptop open on the table, she couldn't resist. When she opened it, Claire found archived conversations. Messages he thought he had deleted but were still stored in the history. She read each one of them, and every word felt like a stab. She saw how it all began, from the first flirts to the most intimate conversations, the declarations, the secret meetings. And beyond the messages, she found bank transfer receipts. She clearly saw the amount sent to Jessica, with a generic description, but in that context, it spoke louder than any text. Claire's blood boiled. She felt anger, disgust, sadness, and indignation that took over her entire body. But instead of confronting Austin, she did something much more calculated. She decided that before any confrontation, someone else deserved to know about it. She called Brian. Her voice was firm, direct, without beating around the bush. She said she needed to talk, that it was serious, and that he deserved to know the truth. They arranged to meet. And as soon as they sat face to face, Claire opened the laptop, turned to him, and without saying a word, showed him everything. The messages, the conversations, the screenshots, the transfers. Brian read in silence, went pale, motionless, as if the world had stopped. For a few minutes, no words were spoken. When he finished reading everything, Brian took a deep breath, looked at Claire, and simply said, "Thank you for telling me." He got up and left. He didn't ask anything else, didn't want details, didn't want to hear excuses from anyone. In his mind, it was already all clear. Jessica was at home when Brian arrived. As soon as he walked in, she noticed something was different. He didn't look her in the eye, didn't say a word. He went to the bedroom, grabbed some clothes, a backpack, documents, and left without explaining where he was going. And she, not understanding anything at that moment, asked several times what was happening. The only thing he replied, before slamming the door, was, "It's over. I only feel sorry for you." Panic hit. Jessica tried calling, sent messages, ran after him, but Brian didn't want to talk. And to make matters worse, that same day, Austin showed up too. But unlike before, he wasn't there for a secret meeting or to pretend affection. He was serious, visibly irritated. He said that Claire knew everything, that she had discovered the messages, the transfers, and most importantly, that she was suspicious of this pregnancy. Jessica, in a desperate attempt to hold on to that lie, said she was nauseous, that she wasn't feeling well, that she was trying to schedule an appointment, but the doctor wasn't available. Austin crossed his arms, stared at her for a few seconds, and responded harshly, "Then make that appointment, because tomorrow you're going to the doctor with me. And we're ending this story." Jessica froze. Her whole body trembled. She knew she was cornered. She tried to argue, said she was nervous, that it wasn't the best time, but Austin wouldn't budge. He said that either she went, or he would resolve it another way. The next day, Jessica tried everything to avoid it. She cried, claimed she wasn't feeling well, that she couldn't get out of bed. But Austin went to her house, practically forced her into the car, and drove to a clinic. During the ride, she was sweating cold, shaking, heart racing, imagining 1,000 ways to get out of the situation, but none seemed possible. When they arrived, the doctor asked for a few minutes alone with Jessica, asked some routine questions, and then performed a quick evaluation. And in less than 20 minutes, the truth came out. The doctor looked her in the eyes and said, objectively and directly, "You're not pregnant. And from what I'm seeing here, you never were." Jessica felt her whole body go cold. Her hands shook, her legs went limp, and the words simply disappeared from her mouth. When the doctor called Austin back into the room, he realized, just from the doctor's look, that he didn't even need to hear what she had to say. And when she confirmed, Austin stood silent for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and said, "I feel nothing but disgust for you." He stood up, slammed the door, and left. Jessica remained there, sitting, staring at the floor, lost, empty, without reaction, as everything she had tried to build, in the worst possible way, crumbled in front of her. Panic overwhelmed Jessica. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened, it felt like the air was escaping. She grabbed her phone and, almost without thinking, called Brian. After a few seconds, he answered. His voice was dry, cold, without a trace of affection. She tried to start, but he cut her off immediately, shutting down any attempt at conversation. Wait for my lawyer. We're getting officially divorced. Claire told me everything. She told me you might be pregnant with Austin's child. I only hope this baby will be happier, much happier than you deserve. Jessica took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and before he hung up, she blurted out, Brian. I'm not pregnant. I made it all up. It was a lie. I messed up. The silence on the other end was cutting. For a few seconds, she thought he wouldn't even respond, but the reply came, hard as a verdict, you're sick. Seriously, you need help. And without waiting for another word, he hung up. At that moment, Jessica realized she had lost everything. The marriage, the respect, the trust, any bond that still existed. She tried to hold back the tears, tried to convince herself she could start over, but reality hit harder than any pain. The money Austin had transferred was frozen, a result of the lawsuit Claire filed, alleging misappropriation and fraud. And without that money, the app, which was already behind schedule, simply died. She tried for months to rebuild. She sought partners, investors, tried to convince old colleagues to join the project, but the story had already spread. Her name had become synonymous with problems, lies, and drama. No one wanted to associate with her, no one wanted to risk having their name tied to hers. Doors that once seemed wide open were now shut in her face without ceremony. Bills began to pile up. Jessica sold clothes, furniture, tried to cut expenses, but everything seemed to fall apart faster and faster. She spent hours scrolling through social media feeds, looking at the lives of people she knew and wondering where, exactly, everything had started to go so wrong. And as much as she tried to convince herself it had been a mistake, deep down she knew every step, every decision, was made consciously, driven by ambition, desire, and selfishness. But the hardest blow was still to come. A few weeks later, while scrolling through her phone, she came across a photo that made her heart race. It was Claire and Austin. They had gotten married. Officially. And as if the universe insisted on rubbing it in her face, the caption said it all, love conquers any storm. And now, we are 3. We can't wait to meet our baby. Jessica froze. Her gaze fixed on that screen, unable to blink, unable to breathe. Claire was pregnant. For real. That was the child she had tried to fabricate. A child that now not only united Austin and Claire but also sealed, once and for all, the end of any chance she had of returning to the life she had envied so much. She understood, in the cruelest way possible, that whoever builds their life on lies sooner or later watches it all collapse. And when it collapses, absolutely nothing remains. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Victor and Rebecca Carter were the kind of couple that, in the eyes of anyone, seemed perfect. Successful businesspeople, owners of a consulting firm that served clients from various sectors. They were partners in business and in life. Always aligned in decisions, planning every step, every investment, every achievement. 10 years of marriage, no children, by choice. They had agreed from the beginning that they would prioritize financial stability before expanding the family. And the truth is, they succeeded. They lived very well, frequented the best restaurants, traveled to expensive destinations, wore the finest clothes, and were admired in the business world. The conference they would attend that weekend was just one among many others. It was part of their routine. Lectures, networking, contracts, new clients, partnerships. It was the kind of environment where both of them shone. The trip started like any other. They arrived, checked into the hotel where the event would take place, organized their materials, reviewed the presentation they would give the next day. Everything was as expected. On the first night, after fulfilling their professional commitments, they decided to go down to the hotel bar. This was something common between them. They liked to relax, talk about life, laugh about the day's situations. They ordered drinks, some appetizers, and started talking. The first glasses came, and soon the conversation, which at first was about business, began to change tone. Rebecca was more relaxed than usual, perhaps even looser than Victor was used to seeing her. She smiled in a different way, made jokes she normally wouldn't, and every now and then looked at him with a gaze Victor couldn't tell if it was teasing or something about to explode. Between sips, they started talking about the future. About the next steps, about when, in fact, they would start thinking about having kids, slowing down the work pace, living a bit more of their personal life. Victor, as always, reinforced that he was feeling more secure, that soon they could, indeed, take that step. It was then, out of nowhere, without any introduction, that Rebecca dropped something that almost made Victor drop his glass. She looked at him, smiled half smiling, and said, as if commenting on something trivial, "I've been thinking. We can stay together, build our family, keep everything the way it is, but I want the freedom to, every once in a while, get involved with other people. Especially on weekends." The silence that took over the table was immediate. Victor froze. He locked up. He looked at her trying to understand if this was a bad joke, if it was some kind of joke to break the ice, if it was the effect of the alcohol, but she was serious. She wasn't laughing. She just looked at him, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Victor, who until that moment had been completely relaxed, felt his whole body stiffen. His hands started to sweat. His brain desperately tried to find a rational explanation for this, but none of them made sense. She picked up the glass, took another sip, crossed her legs, and added, as if talking about which restaurant to choose the next day, "We love each other, Victor. It's just that, sometimes, I feel the need to experience different things. To try other connections. This doesn't have to change anything between us. Our life goes on. It's just, more freedom." Victor remained silent. His mind was a whirlwind. It was as if, in a matter of seconds, everything they had built together started to crumble in front of him. He tried to smile, but the smile came out crooked, lifeless, completely disconnected from what he was feeling. His throat felt locked. The words, which always came easily to a businessman accustomed to negotiating millions, simply disappeared. As he tried to process that absurdity, Rebecca remained calm, as if she were merely stating a legitimate need, something that, in her mind, shouldn't be cause for scandal. And perhaps that was what scared him the most. The coldness. The naturalness with which she spoke about it. He expected anything from her, except that. Victor looked at the glass, looked at his hands, looked at her, and for a moment, he wondered if all this was really happening or if it was the effect of the drink, the fatigue, the stress. He wanted to believe it was just that. That soon she would laugh, say it was a silly joke, that she was just testing his reaction. But the minutes passed, and that half-smile, that serious look, that absolutely confident tone of voice made it clear that it wasn't a joke. The rest of that night was strange. Tense. They went up to the room, lay down, but Victor couldn't sleep properly. He tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand at what point the woman he chose to spend his life with started to desire a parallel life. And as much as he tried to find a justification, the only question hammering in his head was, why? The next morning, Victor woke up earlier than usual. His mind felt heavy, as if he had spent the whole night fighting against a million thoughts racing through his head. Rebecca was still sleeping, turned to the side, as if absolutely nothing had happened the night before. He stayed there for a few minutes observing, trying to figure out if all this had really happened or if it was just the result of too much drinking mixed with the exhaustion of the trip. While getting dressed, he took a deep breath and decided that this needed to be clarified. He still hoped to believe that it was all just meaningless talk, thrown out in the heat of the moment, something without weight, without real intention. When Rebecca woke up, he tried to bring up the subject lightly, almost as if joking. He smiled awkwardly and said, "You know, I've been thinking about your proposal from yesterday. What craziness, huh? Look what alcohol does to our heads." What he expected was for her to smile, roll her eyes, and say that she really exaggerated, that she was just joking, that it was nonsense talk after a few drinks. But that's not what happened. Rebecca sat up in bed, looked directly into his eyes, without looking away, and responded with the utmost naturalness, "Victor, I was completely sober when I said that. And yes, I stand by what I said. I need that freedom. I'm not asking for your permission, I'm just being honest." Victor stayed motionless for a few seconds, unable to react. His mind processed that information as if it were a direct punch to the stomach. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. He swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and, still hoping that this was just a phase, said, "Rebecca, do you have any idea what you're saying? We have a life, a story, a business, projects, plans, and you throw this out as if it were the most natural thing in the world?" She crossed her arms, took a deep breath, and with a tone bordering on coldness, replied, "Victor, I love you. And I don't want to separate. It's just that I can't live anymore trapped in this idea that loving means exclusivity. I want to be able to allow myself to experience other things, other connections. This doesn't change what I feel for you, nor everything we've built." He held his face with both hands, ran his fingers through his hair, feeling his entire body vibrating between anger, frustration, and disbelief. He wanted to scream, to ask if she had gone crazy, but he held back because part of him still refused to believe that this was, in fact, happening. Rebecca got up, started getting ready as if that conversation were just one of many. She acted with an alarming calmness. Victor felt like someone who fell into a nightmare from which he simply couldn't wake up. He looked at her and tried to understand how, at what point, the woman he had known for so many years had transformed into someone who could say those things without even trembling in her voice. The conference was coming to an end. After the last lectures, the participants gathered for the closing cocktail. A relaxed environment, where entrepreneurs talked, exchanged business cards, and toasted future partnerships. Victor was visibly shaken, trying to pretend normalcy. He kept conversations short, greeted people, but his mind was distant, lost in what had happened hours before. Rebecca, on the other hand, seemed like a different person. Uninhibited, talkative, smiling, as if she had lifted a weight off her shoulders. During the cocktail, she moved away from him, went to talk to some acquaintances, walked from table to table, circulating. Victor, from a distance, observed everything, just following her movements, without much interest, without much patience. At one point, she returned to him with a glass in hand, laughing, and before he could say anything, she dropped a sentence that made his stomach freeze. "I think now it doesn't matter if I tell you. After all, since I've already said everything I feel, there's no point in hiding. I'm already seeing someone. I met them at the gym a few months ago." The ground simply disappeared beneath Victor's feet. His blood rushed, his face got hot, his hands trembled. A mix of shock, anger, and disbelief took over him. "You're kidding with me, right? Tell me it's a lie. Tell me you're just trying to provoke me, that this is just to test me," he said, his voice almost failing. Rebecca held his gaze firmly. "Victor, this has nothing to do with you. I care about you, I love our life together, but I also want to live other things. And I have. And I want to keep living." By this point, any trace of control he had simply evaporated. There was no scene, no public argument, no need for it. Just a look. A look that said everything. He stared at her as if looking at a stranger on the street. Without words. Without strength. Without exchanging another word, he turned around, left the glass on the table, and walked away from the cocktail. Rebecca didn't even try to stop him. She just stood there, watching, as if she knew exactly what she had done but didn't regret it. They left the event in absolute silence. Each walking side by side, but as distant as two complete strangers. They got into the car, and during the entire ride back, no words were spoken. Only the sound of the engine filled that deafening void. As soon as they got home, Victor opened the door, let Rebecca in, and without even exchanging glances, walked straight to the office. There was no room for discussion, explanations, or any kind of justification. Right there, at that exact moment, he already knew exactly what he would do. And that's exactly what he did. Victor didn't waste time. The next morning, before even having breakfast, he was already on the phone with his trusted lawyer. The decision was made. The divorce would be immediate, no turning back, no emotional negotiation, no space for attempts to reverse the situation. He simply communicated what he had decided, gave the necessary instructions, and asked for the papers to be prepared urgently. While the lawyer handled the formalities, Victor spent the following days taking care of the practical details. He separated documents, analyzed accounts, listed assets, reviewed contracts. Everything needed to be perfectly aligned. The pain was immense, the shock still pulsed in his chest, but he knew he couldn't let himself sink into that feeling. The priority now was to protect his life, his assets, and his future. During the process, it became clear to him that the relationship, in fact, had ended long before that trip. He just hadn't realized it. He began to see clearly situations he had previously ignored. Small actions, empty looks, distances disguised as tiredness. It all made sense now. And as painful as it was, it brought a kind of liberation. The divorce went through quickly, without major obstacles. He gave up some things to speed up the process. He wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. While Rebecca seemed to believe she was starting an incredible new phase of her life, Victor focused on rebuilding himself. He decided to sell his share of the company they founded together, left that environment where everything reminded him of her, and went after a fresh start, a new beginning without any remnants of that past. And that's exactly what he did. He invested in the real estate market, something he had always admired but never had the courage to fully dive into. He bought some plots of land, bet on renovations of old properties, sought out new partners, met new people, surrounded himself with people who vibrated on the same frequency. And gradually, the fruits began to appear. The first sales came, profits started to grow, and without realizing it, Victor found himself building a much more solid, profitable, and, above all, lighter company. In this new cycle, life also brought surprises. He met Natalie, a woman with completely different energy. A partner, a friend, a companion in every sense. She didn't enter his life to fill a void, she entered to add. Together they built a true relationship based on respect, complicity, and genuine love. The years flew by. When Victor realized it, he was already the father of 3 girls, who became his greatest reason for living. Every one of their smiles was a daily reminder that everything he had lived through, as bad as it may have been, had a purpose. And that man who, 7 years ago, felt shattered, was now whole, complete, fulfilled. It was at a business event, organized by a real estate sector association, that something unexpected happened. While talking to some investors, Victor noticed, from afar, a familiar face. That image made his whole body react immediately, as if he had received an electric shock. His heart raced, not because of the person herself, but because of the memory of everything that face represented. It was Rebecca. Alone, walking through the hall, holding a glass and observing the people around her. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, a few more marks on her face, but what really caught attention was her gaze. A heavy, sad gaze, burdened with something Victor recognized right away, regret. She saw him too. She stood motionless for a few seconds, as if deciding whether to approach him or pretend she hadn't seen him. But then she took a deep breath and started walking toward him. Victor, for his part, stayed where he was, immobile, watching the scene unfold like someone watching a movie play out in front of him. When she was standing right in front of him, Rebecca tried to smile, but the smile didn't hold. Her gaze seemed weighed down with something hard to describe, as if the words were struggling to come out but stuck in her throat. She took a deep breath, adjusted a strand of hair uncomfortably, and after a few seconds of awkward silence, said, in a much lower tone than Victor was used to hearing from her, "You know, I never imagined I'd run into you here." She averted her eyes for a few seconds, as if gathering courage, and looked at him again. "You're doing well. I can see it. You're really doing well." She tried to smile again, but her eyes betrayed everything her mouth didn't have the courage to admit. There was a mix of admiration, sadness, and maybe even a hint of shame hidden there. Victor just nodded slightly, simply, without much effort, as if he didn't want to extend the encounter longer than necessary. But she continued. "I won't lie. It's strange to see you after so much time. And, you know, sometimes life takes us down paths that we think make sense, but in the end, it's not always how we imagined." She squeezed her own fingers, looked at the floor, took a deep breath, and added, with a much more sincere tone, almost broken, "Victor, I made a mistake. I thought I had everything under control, that I knew exactly what I was doing, that kind of freedom would make me happy. And, it didn't quite turn out that way." She stayed silent for a few seconds, seemingly choosing her words carefully. "I'm not here to ask you for anything, nor to justify anything. I just thought, maybe it would be fair for you to know, that not everything turned out the way I imagined." Rebecca blinked several times, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on forming. "Life taught me, the hard way." Victor kept his gaze fixed on her. And in that moment, he realized that it no longer hurt him, didn't wound him, didn't bring any kind of pain. It was just, the past. He simply responded, with all the serenity of someone who had closed that chapter a long time ago, "I sincerely hope you found what you were looking for. And if you haven't found it yet, I hope you do." She took a deep breath, lightly shook her head, as if understanding what he meant, and took 2 steps back, giving a sad smile. Victor just nodded, turned around, and went on his way, without looking back. Because those who keep looking back, rarely see what's ahead. As Victor walked away from her at that event, Rebecca stood there, motionless, watching him disappear among the crowd, and her mind immediately began to revisit the last 7 years of her own life, as if her memory decided to throw everything she had tried to pretend didn't hurt right in her face. After the divorce, Rebecca moved forward just as she always believed she would. She was an intelligent woman, extremely competent and determined. Her career soared even higher. She opened her own consulting firm, expanded her business, closed multi-million-dollar deals, grew, traveled, achieved everything she wanted. And if anyone looked from the outside, they would say she was the picture of success. She threw herself into that lifestyle she believed was missing to be truly happy. The freedom to do whatever she wanted, to not answer to anyone, to live intensely, without being tied to commitments, without demands, without emotional responsibilities. She met a lot of people, many partners, many different experiences. And at first, it seemed incredible. That feeling of being in control of her own life, of being desired, of being sought after, of being absolutely in charge. In the first few years, everything made sense. There were trips, parties, dinners, short-term relationships, casual encounters, people coming and going in and out of her life as if it were an endless cycle. She laughed, toasted, had fun. She felt free, powerful, invincible. Her bank account only grew, her assets multiplied, invitations came from everywhere. She was the center of attention wherever she went. But slowly, what seemed exciting began to lose its shine. Conversations became superficial, meetings felt empty, and the connections, if you could call them that, were just momentary exchanges, where no one really cared about anyone else. And that's when Rebecca began to notice a pattern. People weren't approaching her, they were approaching what she represented. The money, the benefits, the access, the status. At first, she pretended she didn't care. She told herself that was just how it was, that it was the price of freedom, that love, connection, those things were outdated romantic illusions. But as the years passed, that sense of control started to give way to a void that seemed to grow every day. She woke up in silk sheets but with a loneliness that seemed to scream inside her. She had cars, properties, trips, but none of these things filled what, deep down, she avoided facing. And that void became even crueler the day she, by accident, while scrolling through social media, came across a photo of Victor. He was with a woman, smiling. In his arms, a little girl. In the caption, something simple, but that hurt more than any punch, my reason for living. She clicked on the profile. More photos. Victor playing with 3 daughters, birthdays, family trips, simple outings, sincere smiles. And each image seemed to scream in her mind a question she had avoided asking until then: what have I done? She spent hours staring at those pictures, scrolling through the feed, reading the captions, observing every detail, every expression. And for the first time, she felt a regret so deep it seemed to suffocate her. She remembered everything she had given up, everything she had dismissed, everything she had thrown away in the name of a freedom that, in the end, never really existed. After that day, this regret never left her. The void, which before she could ignore with distractions, now consumed everything. And ironically, the richer she got, the more successful she became, the lonelier she felt. She began to clearly see that the people around her were there only out of interest, for the fancy dinners, the trips, the gifts, for what she could offer, not for who she really was. And carrying all this in her chest, on that day, as she entered that event, she spotted Victor. Seeing him there, fulfilled, smiling, surrounded by people who clearly admired and respected him, felt like taking a punch in the gut. A mix of nostalgia, sadness, regret, and a cruel realization: he moved on, and built exactly the life that, one day, I threw away. And even knowing there was no way to turn back time, she needed at least the chance to say, that today she understands. And that was exactly what gave her the courage to walk up to him, and start that conversation that, in truth, she had rehearsed in her mind for years but never imagined she would ever have the chance to have. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.